As you can see, today's topic is who's watching you, tidy up your mobile privacy. The reason I thought it was worth covering that this week is that we just published an article a couple of days ago on nakedsecurity.sophos.com from one of our senior product managers at Sophos, who has a lot of experience building and delivering products into the mobile workplace. So that's for mobile phones and laptops that go on the road. But today we're going to be focusing on what you can do both at home and at work, whether you've got two separate devices or one device that serves both. We're going to be talking about some very, very simple things you can do, because yes, it's still just Cybersecurity Awareness Month, to tidy up mobile privacy. So I'm not going to give you any major revelations here. I'm not going to say there are these deeply complex and technical things you need to do. What I wish I could do is say, well, just get iOS 14 for your iPhone or Android 11 for your Android, because they've got the latest and greatest and newest privacy features in them, and I'll show you exactly what settings you can do because the menus are standardized. Unfortunately, as we all know, life isn't quite like that. Not all of us have iPhones that can even support iOS 14. Many of us, or the majority of us, probably have Androids, and those are all over the place. So what I've done is I've prepared a little bit of a mixture. I myself have an iPhone that can still only run iOS 12, so I've got a screenshot from there to show you what you can do, and I've deliberately used an old Android phone of mine. I've got an open source version of Android 9 on there. Many of you will still have phones that are stuck back there. Even the latest and greatest phones from some manufacturers still haven't got Android in 11. Some of them aren't likely to get it even until next year. So unfortunately, I wish I could hold up a phone and say, click this button, click that button, drag this slider, and then turn it like this, and you will be fine. Unfortunately, what I really need to do is to kind of give you some very simple guidelines of the terminology to look for and what you should be thinking of doing, if not all the time, at least occasionally, in order to make yourself a little bit less visible to people whose interest in tracking you is not necessarily directly aligned with yours. Not that I'm suggesting they want to spy on you or take photographs of you that they can use against you for malicious or criminal purposes. That does happen with mobile phone malware. What I'm talking about is even legitimate websites and advertising companies that, if you permit them to track you, they will do so. They will join the dots of all the websites you've been to, all the locations you've been to, all the places where you've taken photographs and left that information in the photograph. Some people don't mind that information being used because they feel, hey, I'll get ads that are more targeted to me, and it'll help me meet people who are more likely to have my interests. But even if you are that kind of person, you probably don't want to do it all the time. So the article, which was written by a colleague of mine called Anthony Merry, nakedsecurity.sophos.com, if you want to find it, he just kept very simple to 5 things you can look at on your phone. Go into the settings, learn how the settings work for these options, and we'll go through those 5 very quickly. The first, and perhaps the most obvious, is location. Now, the menus are called something like location services on iOS. It's just location on Android. The newer versions of Android, and of course all recent versions of iOS, they actually let you set for individual, even if you have location on, which means that through GPS, Bluetooth location, Wi-Fi location, etc., through the fact that your phone generally knows roughly or even exactly where it is and can call home with that information, apps can use that to find out where you are and vary their behavior. And on all modern phones, you can set apps so that if you want to have location on because maybe you have a mapping app that's really useful with, and you don't want to keep having to turn location on and off all the time, you can now set on almost all recent versions of iOS and Android, you can set for each app. You can set that the terminology is slightly different between iOS and Android, but you can choose between always, which means an app can always find your location. You may want that for a mapping app or a compass app or something like that. Only when using, which you may want, for example, for a weather app, so when you open the app and you bring it to the foreground, you don't mind it finding out where you are because you want it to give it tomorrow's forecast for the town you're in. and never. And you can set that individually for apps. But the important thing is to find out, I hope you can see this. This is an Android 9, so recent Androids will be similar. I hope you can see this. The reason I was a bit late today is the lighting's not very good because it's winter now, so I have to have the interior lights on. It messes up the thing. Here's the Android setting. You can see on my phone here, I've turned the location off. Don't be afraid to do that. Your phone does not need to know exactly where you are all the time. You should feel that you are in control, and if you don't wish to be tracked to location, if you turn the setting off, then even if apps do call the functions that say, where am I, the GPS will not be getting a signal. It will not provide Wi-Fi data to apps. And you probably can't see that clearly. It's something similar on iPhone. You can actually get a view these days on mobile phones of which apps have asked for location information recently. That's very handy because you think, oh golly, I left location on. I wonder which apps know where I've been. You can actually find out where to go, and you can actually find out that. And that will help you determine how aggressive apps are at wanting to know where you are, which also helps you make an informed decision about whether you want to set them into the always, never, or only when using mode. So I have a few apps that I have only when using, for example, a compass app. Very handy because it gives you, in the UK, it gives you the exact grid reference for an Ordnance Survey map. Very handy if you're out in the bush and you get lost. But when I close that app, then I don't want it or put it in the background. It doesn't need to know my location except when I need to know it, and I'm prepared to share that with the app. So that's number one. There are 5, by the way. So the first thing is location. The second thing, and if you go to the article, it's a tricky title to use because this is how Apple are now calling it, and that is tracking. And you think, oh, well, tracking is about, you think of that tracking is about keeping track of where you are. But tracking, at least in Apple's new terminology, refers to what apps do while you're using them. So they're not really tracking in. There's a new option in iOS 14, which is just simply to set tracking. Talk about doing something similar to Android. What we mean here is that the fact that something like your web browser will retain information about websites you've visited through things like cookies and locally stored data, just like it will on your laptop computer. And it will combine that with the fact that your mobile phone is mobile, so it has other things that can tell the app. So Apple has an option now that you can turn on that minimizes the extent to which individual apps can put 2 and 2 together about where you went last time and where you've gone now online. In other words, it gives them a little less advertising insight into you. And that's a useful option to turn on. Older Androids, you don't have that option. So what I recommend you do is learn for all the apps you use where the options are in the app that help you throw away, and any decent app will have this. It might force you to opt out or go in and use the option, but most apps do have this a function where you can go in and say, I want you to forget everything that you've stored locally. I've allowed you to store locally about me so far. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a fresh start in terms of being tracked online. So here's an example. This is iOS 12. It's very similar in modern versions of iOS. So this is a screenshot off my Apple phone. There's actually a Safari item in settings. And if you look at it, hope you can see that. There's the various settings for Safari. If I go to the bottom, you'll see there's actually an option, clear history and website data. And then at the bottom, oh, you probably can't see that, it's blurred out a bit. Clear settings in red. So that's like clearing cookies out of the browser that you use on your laptop. What you need to remember is that it depends on which mobile browser you're using. In Safari, you can't get it to clear cookies while you're inside Safari. You have to go to Settings Safari. On Android phones and with other browsers, it's a little bit different. If you do have a mobile phone, you think like an Android phone, you think I'd like to use a browser that is much less aggressive about remembering which websites I went to before and what I was doing just before I went to that website and so on, then you might want to try an alternative browser. For example, I use a thing called DuckDuckGo, not just because I'm kind of quite partial to ducks. And you see there, it gives you a little cute thing. So remember, every time you run me, what does it say? Remember, every time you browse with me, a creepy ad loses its wings. And the neat thing about DuckDuckGo is it's sort of meant to be a privacy-centric browser, but it has options that mean that you don't have to remember, like with settings, Safari, clear web data. You can forget that for weeks at a time, and it's amazing how much data builds up about how many websites know what you've been doing online. So with DuckDuckGo, and other browsers have something similar, I can't make that easily legible. I'll have to read it to you. There's an option that lets you say automatically clear, and I can choose to clear tabs and browsing data, and there's an option that automatically clear. I can do it when I close down the app. So every time I forcibly exit the app, I automatically know that I've triggered the clearing. And you can also do it, well, if I haven't used my browser, I haven't done anything for 60 minutes, clear my history so that when I start again, it doesn't know that I'm the same person that I was an hour ago. And that gives you, that still means that sites can track you while you're using them, so you can log in and do some stuff, or if you're browsing a shopping site, it'll remember what you're ordering and your cart will build up correctly, and you can go back to things that you were browsing before and compare prices, for example, across different sites and so forth. But it means that then if you do nothing for a little while and then you go back to that site tomorrow, it won't, you kind of get a fresh start. So that's what we mean in the article when we talk about item 2 of your mobile privacy to worry about, and that's tracking. Item number 3, of course, is the one that everyone's most scared of, and that is camera. Now, in old versions of Android, camera and microphone were treated as one permission, and you had to give an app up front when you installed it. You had to say you can use camera and microphone or not. And the idea was to keep it simple, because obviously if you have a video conferencing app, you assume you probably want camera and microphone. But the good news is that in modern versions, let me get to this, on Android, and it's slightly different depending on whether you've got iOS or Android. And of course, I've forgotten that you're probably not going to be able to see this clearly, but I hope you can. You can actually review, so it's, I think, Permissions Manager or on Android, or permissions, app permissions on iOS. So here, for example, on my Android, I've got a page that actually shows me camera permissions. And obviously I want the camera to have access to the camera so I can take photographs, but you'll see I've turned it off, for I don't have very many apps installed here. I turned off lots of apps. The good news is that if, say, you have an app like Zoom and you're not in the habit of using video, you just use it for calls. I use Zoom predominantly without video when I'm on my phone. Is that you don't have to give it access to your camera. You can go into the permissions and turn off camera access. It won't stop the app from working. It does mean that when you try and turn on video, it won't come on for you. You'll have to go back into settings. But you can actually use the permissions for your camera to prevent an app, even an app that you may want in the future to have access to your camera. You can say, well, I'm not going to give it to you by default. So that way, if at some time the app forgets to ask you whether you want to turn video on, or you join a meeting that has video enabled by default and you didn't realize, then because the operating system on your phone is looking after the permissions from the camera, what that means is that the app, when it tries to get access to the camera, whether it's planning to ask you or not, you'll get a warning from the operating system. You will have to go into settings and turn it on. So it's a little bit of extra fuss, but it gives you that extra control. And the fourth thing on our list of 5, of course, is the microphone, which is now distinct from camera. So that does mean you can have a video conferencing app that you use. If you generally do not want to appear on video, but you want to use it for calling purposes, you can have the camera off and the microphone on. So there I've got, and of course, try and get that. So you can see the only app I've got with microphone permission is camera. Obviously, the traditional definition of camera is something that takes pictures, but of course the idea here is that the camera app is generally the one that you also use it to record video, so it makes sense for that to have microphone access. You might not want it to have microphone access all the time, or you might want to make sure that if you start the camera by mistake, or if you install an app that has camera access, that would use camera access if it has it, this gives you the way to turn that off for that app no matter what the app thinks. So just to go through those 4 things, there's location. You can turn it off altogether on your phone, and it's not a bad idea to do that when you don't want to be tracked. And on modern phones, you can also check what level of access to location each individual app has. So you can have an app that would love to know your location but prevent it from having location access, even though your phone's GPS is on at the time. The second thing is the issue of tracking yourself in apps, and for that there's a sort of silver bullet on iOS 14, an option in settings tracking where you can inhibit the amount of data apps can collect about you as you browse, but on older versions of iOS and on Android you'll need to learn those settings in each app, particularly for your browser. And unfortunately, I know on my iPhone I showed you how to do it with Safari. It's Settings Safari. If you use Microsoft Edge, which I also have as my alternative browser on the iPhone, that's an option that's a different place. It's inside the app and it's a slightly different sequence. Unfortunately, you have to go and find out and learn it for each device. And of course, the last thing to think about, because this gives people who are near to you access to your phone, and it's also a predominant method used for tracking where your phone is, and that is Bluetooth. So there's on my Android phone, you'll see I've got Bluetooth turned on. Now I would have sworn I had it off, but when I was preparing for this video, I actually thought, oh, let me just see what the pair new device option does. And the reason why I recommend learning where all these menus are and going back and revisiting them, no matter what your status indicators say, is it's easy to forget. Oh, I could have sworn I turned location services off, but if you forgot, then nothing. The little status indicators at the top of the home screen can help, but nothing beats seeing the actual Bluetooth page. And mine was turned on because I went to pair a device, didn't go through with it, but Android had turned on Bluetooth, warned me it was going to do this. It turned on Bluetooth so that I could use the pairing option. And having used the pairing option but not completed my pairing, of course, I ended up with Bluetooth left on. Now I can see that by going to there's the state. That's how the status indicator looks on this version of Android. You've got something similar on modern Androids and on iOS. You'll see the Bluetooth logo, the Bluetooth runes at the top there that's turned on, that shows you it's on. But my recommendation is for all of these things, and I'll go through them one last time, is learn where the main control screens for all of these potentially privacy sapping features are. So don't just rely on status indicators or, oh, there's a little blob like the latest version of iOS, I believe. If you have when the microphone comes on, there's a little amber blob or spot appears on the home screen to warn you that the microphone's active. There's a little green light, a little green blob that comes on to tell you something's using the camera. You don't know what, but those are easy. So for all of these, learn what are, and B, exactly go in the main settings panel to turn this off. So there's location, there's one place where you can turn that off for every app, and when it's off, generally speaking, it's off. So apps, if they even try and find out what your location is, they'll just get no response from the operating system. There's the issue of app specific tracking, and aside from iOS 14, there's no silver bullet for that. You need to learn how you go and clear historical data out of all the apps you use, notably your browsers. There's camera and microphone, which are sort of two sides of the same coin, but in modern mobile phones you can control them separately, and there's nothing wrong with having a video conferencing app. It may complain every time you start it. Oh, I won't be able to turn on your video. If that's what you intend, it's okay to tell that app you're not allowed to access the camera. And then even if it wants to, even if it would turn it on automatically, it won't be able to until you go into settings and turn it on. And the last thing not to forget about is Bluetooth. If you get in the habit of turning Bluetooth off fully when you don't need it, there is one handy surprise, and this is also true for location. Your battery will last a lot longer because the GPS in your phone and Bluetooth tend to use as much battery as the rest of the phone put together. They do require power to operate and to receive the signals